My name is Rex Evilsizer. I started working for the New York Central Railroad in 1958. I answered an ad in the local newspaper, and I went down to the local Penn Central passenger station, superintendent's office, and they asked me if I could teletype or telegraph. I told them I could do neither, but I could learn. By the way, when was the last time you were asked that question? Do you teletype or telegraph? I stayed with the New York Central, which later became the Penn Central, and then later I accepted a position with the Interstate Commerce Commission. Some of my titles and duties of a railroad freight agent and telegrapher was block operator, car distributor, crew caller, freight bill clerk, headhunter, interline clerk, interlocking operator, official brakeman, operator, supervisor of stations, train dispatcher, car distributor, waybill clerk, wire chief, yard clerk, and I'm sure I had some others that are not coming to mind at the time. Early in 1958, I answered an ad with the New York Central Railroad. They were looking for a teletype and telegraph operators. But since I told them I didn't know either one of them and I could learn, they hired me. And during the course of time, I was also an agent for the Railway Express Agency, which was ended up we did all the work for them, at least in our area. The passenger station that you see here is where I went to and get my first job. On the second floor was a dispatcher's office on one end, superintendent's office on the other end, and in the middle was the wire chief and car distributor, and I've worked both of those jobs as well during time. And when they told me that I could go to work, they sent me over to London, Ohio. And the picture you see here is exactly the station that I worked in. And remember, back then, some of these stations did not have bathrooms, electricity, and no indoor plumbing. Many of them that I worked at were just like this and had no facilities at all. But while we were there, electricity did come on, and we had it for a while until at least I left and went to work as a union employee for the ORT, Order of Railroad Telegraphers. The local station agent was also the Justice of Peace, the mayor, city recorder, treasurer, county judge, bank director, telegraph operator, president of the school board, express agent, baggage master, real estate agent, passenger agent, city clerk, waybill clerk, freight bill clerk, yard clerk. He was the center of all activity. He also handled the loss and damage for the railroad. He worked 7 days a week, no vacations. And at the station agent, there was a coal burning stove, no electricity. There was a water pump outside, no indoor running water. And there was an outhouse, no indoors bathroom. The station agent worked 7 days a week, no vacations. And yes, he lived in the freight office. I'm well aware of that because I have lived in many of the warehouses of the depots as I was sent there to perform the services of the station agent. I have even slept in a caboose. The station agent was a very dedicated employee. And if you look at the picture, it appears that with personal items showing that he definitely lived in the depot, with or without his family. The station agent was the only one in town who had the correct time. Standard time was the time that was used on railroads. It was set by the Great Western Railway. We didn't care about the local time, the mountain time, or the daylight savings, or whatever other time zone there was. We went by the standard time zone. The watches, the first watch approved for use on the railroad was in 1959. But because of union rules and railroad rules, the wristwatch was not used until at least 1972. Also, look at the jeans that you have. The jeans have a pocket on the right-hand side. That's for your pocket watch. Railroads and other businesses in 1963 used what they called perforated stamps. They would have their initials inserted into the stamp, and I guess this was a way to keep people from using the stamps for their private use. Also, look at the one envelope, that partly of an envelope, it says RPO on it. That's another industry using perforated stamps. Quite common back in 1963. In June of 1958, I took my test to become a railroad freight agent and a railroad telegrapher at London, Ohio. And several years after that, all I did was go from one station to another and become the extra agent or the vacation agent. And I worked all over Ohio, Indiana, and lower Michigan. In 1967, the order of railroad telegraphers was on its way out. We had less and less towers, and we had less and less jobs. And even though I never held a regular job on the ORT, I worked vacations. The name was now changed to Transportation Communications Employees Union. In 1971, the TCU, Transportation Communications Employees Union, and the BRAC merged into one company. Brotherhood of Railway, Airline, and Steamship Clerks, Freight Handlers, Express, and Station Employees. Now the clerks and the agents and the operators are all belonging to the same union. In 1972, the BRAC, Brotherhood of Railway and Airline Clerk, corrected its name to remove Transportation Communications Division. Now we're all totally BRAC. When I hired out on the New York Central Railroad in 1958, this is the switch key that was given to me at the time. It was used for switches. It was used to open up freight houses and anything else that the railroad had. I had a key to fit it. On the one side, it says CCC and STLRY. That's the Big Four Railroad: Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chicago, and St. Louis Railway. And I have been in all those places. On the back side, it shows the key number, which is 16750, and there's an S on there, which means Southern Division. And this key was made by Adlake, and Adlake is still in existence today. In 1844, Samuel F.B. Morse invented the telegraph. He sent the first message in May from the Supreme Court chamber in Washington, D.C. to the B&O Railroad Depot in Baltimore, Maryland. The first message read, "What hath God wrought?" It was a passage from the Bible's book of Numbers, Numbers 23:23. Railroads installed telegraph lines as a way of communicating with their railroads. The first message was chosen for Morse by Anne Ellsworth, daughter of the governor of Connecticut. Information could now be sent rapidly. As a result, towns in isolated areas could now communicate more quickly with the rest of the country. The telegraph key in 1958, when I started railroading, was a familiar sound throughout the depots and the interlocking operator stations. And every day at 12 noon or 12 midnight, a sound would come on telling you that it was exactly midnight. Then you went to your clock, your wind-up clock on the wall, and set the correct time. This was familiar, very familiar, and I have done it on many occasions. The teletype machine, as you see here, was usually only found in superintendent's offices, where we sent one message to the vice president or president of the railroad. And if you notice, in looking at the teletype machine, there is no screen. You don't see what you're typing as you are typing. But when you get through, you will have produced a 5-channel tape as pictured here. And then you run the tape through another item on the teletype machine, and it will then print out what you have just typed. I learned how to correct my mistakes, go back and use the letter key and strike out something that I didn't want or made a mistake in. And usually these were found in superintendent's offices. The calculator, as seen here, is very similar to what I used working for the railroad when you're trying to figure out the rates. And the calculator would add, subtract, multiply, and divide if you knew how to do it. Dividing, I didn't do much of that. But to come down and do the add and subtract and multiply, it was very easy to use. And this is very similar. 10 key is what they called it. The picture you're looking at now are only car seals. They are used to put on both sides of the boxcar to show that if there was anybody that had broken into them, they're really very easy to break and get into. And it was just as a device to see if anybody had gotten into the car after the shipper had sealed it. And if you'll notice, these seals, they are numbered numerically in order, and I have two from the Big Four Railroad and two from the Pennsylvania. The waybill is the document that travels with the conductor in the train. On the left side, it shows where the car is going, and on the right side of the waybill, it shows where it come from. It shows the junctions with each railroad. It has the car initial and number, kind of car, date of shipment. It shows commodity, routing, weight, shipper, destination, and consignee. One of these must accompany each car that is in the train. Wax sealers in today's world, are very rare. There's only one of a kind. And what you see here in front of you is one from the Big Four Railroad out of Miamisburg, Ohio freight office, and the other one is from the New York Central Railroad ticket office at Fostoria, Ohio. What the seals were used for is just to seal the envelope, and that way they could tell at the destination whether anything had been broken into. Normally there's stuff precious that are put inside of here, some document that is really important, and some bill ladings are. And also if money is wanted to be transported from one place to another, they're put in an envelope and sealed, if you will. It doesn't stop the stealing, but it does give an indication that somebody got into it and took out something. The interlocking tower was a familiar sight years ago. I have worked in many of them. They all look about alike, and most of them are up on second floor. This is where the two trains would come together, and you would make sure that they crossed the switches safely. And in the tower, there was what they called strongman. And they were levers that were on, a lot of them were on timers. So it would take a time. You just couldn't throw a switch and throw one train into another. It just couldn't happen. Maybe it did, but it never did on my watch. CTC, Centralized Traffic Control. This came into existence in about the mid-1960s. I've worked many of these, but never have I seen one this big. The one picture that you see that is highlighted on the left-hand side is the ones I used to work. Only one. Now each light that you see going across the center of this board, it took 5 jobs. 5 people lost their jobs when the CTC came to their location. Two rail cars that has become extinct. Of course, the top one is the caboose, and the bottom one is the reefer. Many times a refrigerator car would come into my station only for the purpose of getting ice and putting it in one of the bunkers so it could move out with the vegetables, fruits, whatever was inside of it, so it wouldn't spoil. These are now extinct. These are various switch keys and switch locks made by Adlike, and Adlike is still in business today. These are the larger keys are normally for the cabooses, and the smaller switch key at the top is normally for getting into a depot or opening a switch so that you can switch trains from one track to the other. Message stick. The message stick is the item that you hold to hand up train orders to both the engineer and the brakeman or the conductor. The first one you see here is not used anymore. I've only seen them hanging on the walls of the tower. But the other one, the one looks like Y, that's the one that I used, and that's the one that was always used for handing up train orders. The difference between the two is the first one, the conductor engineer takes the whole stick and takes the train orders off and then throws the stick back down somewhere. Hopefully you can find it. The other stick looks like a Y is the one which they reach their hand within the open part, and when they remove it, the train order goes with it. They don't have to throw that one. You always keep a hold of that one. Train orders. Form 19s were normally moving train orders, and order number 31s were normally hold. I don't have any order 31s here, but they're normally yellow. So go back to the one that's on the screen here. It says 19 train order number 64, dated June 29, 1965, and it goes to C&E, which is conductor and engineer of the Western Branch trains at Mendota, and also to C&E engine 310. So it's going to go to two different places. The train order reads, engine 310, run extra Mendota to Denrock and will not protect against following trains between Wendell and Denrock until 2:01 a.m. Following trains must not leave Wendell before 2:01 a.m. And down at the bottom right, CJM is normally the superintendent. And then the bottom line says made COM, that means complete, at 6:52 p.m. and Douglas is the operator. The second order 19 is train order number 1, dated the next morning at 12:02 a.m. Now let me take time and read this train order properly. The way I read it before would not be proper to read back to the train dispatcher. So 19 order number 64 to C&E Western Branch trains at Mendota, to C&E engine 310, THREEONENAUGHT. Engine 310, THREEONENAUGHT, run extra Mendota, MENDOTA, to Denrock, DENROCK, and will not protect against following trains between Wendell, WENDEL, and Denrock, DENROCK, until 2:01 a.m., TWONAUGHTONEAM. Following trains must not leave Wendell, WENDEL, before 2:01 a.m., CJM Douglas. Made complete at 6:52 SIXFIVETWO p.m. That is normally the way you read it back to the dispatcher. The items at the top of this page for the New York Central System are the valuable package register. Used only for company business. Obtain receipt from forwarding agent. Money must be sent by express. Station and train baggagemen will record the number of this register on all station and train reports, same as baggage. The items at the bottom are the ticket stubs between Porter, Indiana and Chesterton, Indiana. The one on the top, the blue one, is for 10 rides, and the yellow one at the bottom for the same destinations is for 25 rides for $8.30 for 25 rides. Not bad. And the one that's on the clear bottom is where it's stamped on the back. New York Central Railroad, July 18th, 1949, at Porter, Indiana. In 1964, I was one of those that was chosen to install computers on the New York Central Railroad. And I went from New York City all the way to Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Charleston, West Virginia, Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis, St. Louis, and most places in between. For 3 years, this is what I did, was install computers. Sometimes we walk into an office and the local freight agent wanted nothing to do with computers, and they walked off the job and retired. We had that happen several different times. But the card that you see also is an IBM 80-column card, and the drum on the right on the next picture, this is how we programmed it as to what we wanted into the 80 columns. And that's all that could be put in the card. So we did a lot of abbreviating. What you see in front of you now is my business card for the year 1967. I was the supervising agent, Southern District, New York Central System, located at 105 South Meridian Street, Indianapolis, Indiana. And the reason for the calendar on the back is because we checked demurrage at stations that we went to, and we wanted to have our own calendar instead of asking somebody if they had an up-to-date calendar. So our business cards usually had the year on it, as this one does. And demurrage is a detention charge for cars that should not be sitting where they might be sitting. After a dispute with another railroad on the West Coast that already had the letters PC and something or other Central in its name, eventually we became known as the Penn Central. And the buttons and trainman and letter opener and all these items on the page there, these were all given to me at the beginning of the Penn Central Railroad, and they have never been on anything, no clothes or anything. But I did use the letter opener, and the one that says "Watch for VM," that was our new magazine name, Watch for Vital Moment. Soon after we merged with the Pennsylvania Railroad, they wanted to call our piggyback operation, truck on flat cars, if you will, they wanted to call it Supervan. Supervan. Sounded good. And I also one day received a tie clasp from the freight sales department. And then the next day they called me and said they were not going to call it Supervan anymore, as the name is now going to be Flexivan. So our piggyback operation was now called Flexivan. A picture by Jackson Gray Story. He was the artist. He drew this in 1964. He was from a ranch in Texas. Jackson Story studied art in Chicago and then opened in 1931 the Central Academy of Commercial Art in Cincinnati. Born in 1901 and died in 1977. Watercolors of mostly Western scenes. However, the story goes that he personally painted this picture for Ray Ivory, who was the New York Central agent at Dayton, Ohio at that time. When Ray retired, he gave the painting to Rex Evilsizer. He gave it to me, who was the next freight agent at Dayton. To make sure that I got it, Ray even printed Rex's name on the back of the picture to ensure that Rex got the picture. It came into my possession somewhere around 1967. I had worked for Ray at various times as one of his clerks. I did the way billing and the freight billing, at times working a clerical job for 2 or 3 weeks at a time when I didn't have any other work to do as a station agent. And I appreciate this from Ray. I don't know if this is the original or if it's a copy, but definitely it's not for sale. You might take a close look at this painting and look at the rail cars the engines are pulling. At the front are tri-levels. Tri-levels are not covered like they are today. These tri-levels were open, and it appears that this train might be coming out of Detroit heading south. The Interstate Commerce Commission was the first regulatory body in the United States. It was formed in 1887 and it went through 1995. And then the US DOT took over whatever functions there was left to take over. In 1973, I was appointed the railroad service agent for the Interstate Commerce Commission in the state of Iowa. This was my picture identification card as it was in 1973. What you see in front of you now is the saucer of the centennial year of the Interstate Commerce Commission. It is very rare, limited edition, and limited distribution. This is the 100th year, centennial year, 1987. What you see now is my 15-year service pin. I never got one for the actual total years with the Interstate Commerce Commission. The pin that you see now in front of you is an outstanding award pin that I received while I was with the Interstate Commerce Commission. The United States of America Interstate Commerce Commission, to whom it may concern, the bearer hereof, Railroad Service Agent Marvin R. Evilsizer, is commissioned by the Interstate Commerce Commission to enter upon, to inspect, and examine lands, buildings, and equipment, and to inspect and copy records and papers of carriers and other persons subject to the Interstate Commerce Act and regulation of the Commission. And along with this identification is my business card showing my operations being in Des Moines, Iowa. And for 6 years, this was my title, and this is where I was. I had the entire state of Iowa alone. In 1979, I was promoted to investigator and moved to Fort Worth, Texas. A couple of years after that, they changed my title to Special Agent, and I'm now with the Office of Compliance and Consumer Assistance. Previous to that, I was a Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement, and now I'm with the Office of Compliance and Consumer Assistance. The picture in front of us now is dated 1975. This is the Interstate Commerce Commission in Washington, D.C. I went to this class, Investigators Training School, and the picture you see in front of you is railroad service agents and the top people in the agency for the entire United States. This is all the rail agents in one picture. District supervisors did not attend this meeting, only rail service agents. And at that time, up until through 79, I was the only rail service agent for the state of Iowa for the Interstate Commerce Commission. And look at the picture. Can you find me? I do my hair a little differently now. Well, look at the first row, clear to the right, next to the right, and you'll see me there with a white shirt, glasses, and hands in front of me standing next to a guy who has the same thing. Only he's got a light colored outfit and mine is dark. Shortly after the training session in Washington, D.C., I was asked to go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. And what I remember best about that place is they had good food at every meal. Have you seen any of these animals lately? It's a yak. Yaks are adapted to high altitudes by having a thick coat of both dense, close, matted underhair and a shaggy outer coat. Usually you can find these in Central Asia or Mongolia. So what do these have to do with the destruction of the Interstate Commerce Commission? In 1965, case number M-19432 at the Interstate Commerce Commission, and may well be remembered as the Great Yak Fat Hoax of 1965. The case resulted from a popular opinion among truckers that railroads stand ready to protest anything truckers propose, no matter what it is. To prove the point, trucker Leroy Hilt of Lincoln, Nebraska, submitted plans to the ICC for shipping massive quantities of yak fat from Omaha to Chicago for 45 cents per 100 pounds. The proposal was fictitious. Yaks are huge oxen which wander around Central Asia, but not the U.S., except maybe in zoos. But, sure enough, the railroads were quick to protest. It was the Western Trunk Line Committee, representing some of the largest railroads in the Midwest, the IC, the GN, the BN, the CN&W, Rock Island, and the Milwaukee, filed an exception which labeled Leroy Hilt's yak fat rates as unrealistic and non-compensatory. The ICC suspended the rates on April 9, 1965, and gave Mr. Hilt a month to come up with evidence to the contrary. But when Mr. Hilt failed to meet the deadline for additional evidence, the ICC rejected his proposal and closed the books on the yak fat case. It took until 1980 for big changes to be made in the transportation industry, both rail and motor. This is called the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, which is a result of the yak fat. Now we have contract carriers. They must have written contract with the people who they're doing business with, both rail and motor. So common carrier term was on its way out. Railroads could now move cars according to their tracks. They didn't have to live up to the routing that was provided by shippers. They could get them there any other way they wanted to, just as long as they kept them on the track and they did not have to live up to the routing. In early 1990, I was thinking seriously of retiring from the Interstate Commerce Commission. So I took a test, and the document you see in front of you is the result of that test that I took. What that document allows me to do is practice law in front of the Interstate Commerce Commission and also later with the USDOT, United States Department of Transportation. You had to be an attorney if you were going to be doing different things. So this is what they call a transportation practitioner, which is the same thing as an attorney that's operating with the Interstate Commerce Commission and now the United States Department of Transportation. Of course, I later retired in October of that year of 1990. And they sent me this document. Actually, this document allows me to represent railroads and trucking companies in the transportation industry.